I don't really want to talk you through the poster either, because it's kind of there behind me. I'll talk a little bit about things that I think the poster doesn't really sort of fully explain, and I'm going to ask you some questions too. I'll give you some time to think about the answers though, not put you on the spot. It was quite hard to create the poster, because just by doing the selection process and putting some things down, it kind of makes it look as if, ta-da, these are the most important things that I found, these are the things that everybody needs to know about. And it's not like that. I'm in the third year of a part-time PhD, and I've got one more set of interviews to collect in a couple of weeks. So this is all very preliminary, and to be honest, it was partly about what would look okay in a poster, have a few graphs and things like that. However, the idea of situated agency is something I'd quite like to go into a little bit more detail with you about today, and perhaps get the benefit of your thoughts and your perspectives. The study itself, in sort of very practical terms, is following a group of PGCE trainee teachers who are postgraduate trainees who've opted, after doing a specialist degree, to train for a year to be secondary school teachers in a variety of subjects. It's very small, qualitative study, and during the year they spend 3 blocks of time practicing in schools, taking on more and more responsibility for the classes that they teach. The way it runs at Bath University, which is where my sample's taken from, is that they have 2 schools to go into, and they're called their home school and a complementary school. Their home school, they start off with in the first term, and they do a block practice leading up to Christmas. Then they have a half term at university, then they go to their complementary school for 6 weeks, and then they return to their home school for their third block practice. So they go into their home school twice, and they have a completely different experience in a different school in the middle of the year. So while becoming teachers, these people have got to go into a new situation in a new school, get to know the place, and come to some kind of understanding pretty quickly about how they can be teachers in that place, while they're still sort of grappling with the understanding of how they can be teachers and what a teacher is and what feels right for them. So in a sense, they've got this personal trajectory of their own development as a teacher, and they have to negotiate that within these 2 specific school contexts. And at the same time, they're balancing some requirements from the university about the things that they've got to do in order to get this qualified teacher status. So there's this complex sort of, they're in the middle, this complex path they have to try and negotiate. And in doing so, they have to make decisions all the time about how to act. And in taking those decisions about how to act, I think they have to show some agency by making a choice. Whether that choice is to do something, to not do something, to wait, and then maybe do something, or whatever the choices that they make, it's their choice, and they somehow deem it to be appropriate, to be apt in those circumstances. Okay, so this is what has developed into my idea of situated agency, a decision-making act that happens in a particular place and time that the individual has responsibility for. They've taken that choice. So situated agency involves a person, it involves context, it involves choices, and that the agency lies in the choices that the individual makes. I should explain that I come from there's a department in a part of the Department of Education in Bath, which is a socio-cultural department, and so I've come through it from the Vygotsky side of things, and this idea of the socio-cultural possibly as some kind of compensation for all the structural ideas about agency is an uneasy place for agency to exist. And there are some attempts, and notably Anne Edwards, who's trying to put agency in a sort of socio-cultural understanding. And so her work has been quite influential to me, and that sort of relational idea is something that I keep seeing coming out with what the trainees are saying. However, what I'm trying to do by calling it situated agency is to say, yes, it's the act of the person, and it's to do with all the things that have happened in their life that have led them to that point, and the values and the beliefs that they have up until that moment, but they are acting within a structure which they perceive in a particularly unique way because of that personal history, and that makes sense to them. And their understanding of the system that they're operating within matters a great deal because it affects the choices that they make. So their reading of the choices that are available to them affects the actions that they take. Okay, so we've got person and place in this idea of agency, and ideally it would be sort of up there, both those ideas at the same time, in the front of our head all the time. Agency. I've read the work of Ole Dreyer and found quite a lot of interesting ideas in him. I don't know if anybody here has come across him at all. He's looking at participation in social practices and how, and you might be able to hear some similarities with what I've just said, how as individuals we go through life with some goals in mind that may be changing on a moment-by-moment basis, and that guides the kind of things that we do, not just in the one activity, but in lots of the different activities that we have. And we might concurrently at the same time simultaneously be involved in 7, 8, 9 different activities, some of which are employment, some of which are social life, some of which are family life, some of which are hobbies, activities, and all these things, and that involves people coming together and doing stuff. Right? Those activities he calls social practice, and in those situations you are required at times to take a personal stance, he calls it, and that's a wee bit like my sort of taking decisions, those moments where you just an action, you have to decide and take an action. He can sort of see how these sort of stances all join up to form a trajectory. And he calls this a sort of a personal trajectory through life. And his definition of agency involves these ideas. He calls it a contextual conception of personal modes of participation. So he puts context as the driving seat, driving force, and sees people operating within those contexts. What I've done is I've kind of taken all his work and all his ideas and said, well, I'm kind of interested in the individual's perspective in those contexts, because you can get two people in the same place and they'll think completely different things are possible and they'll make different choices. Okay, that's agency. Context from a Vygotsky point of view. Cole has done a lot of work, has written a lot. I'm going to read something to you and then I'm going to say what I think it means. This is what he says context is. It's the top of page 2 if you want to read along with me. A Vygotsky-derived position is context, which attributes the very dynamics of change at ontogenetic level to a relational context as mutually constitutive conception of context. Right? The sociocultural part of that is that the context that you're in affects the way you think, the way you see things, and the choices that you make. Key in the context for me are the relationships that people establish with each other. And you can conceptualise a person who's working in a place as somehow having a position within that institution. Okay, so from the trainee teacher's point of view, they come into a school, there's staff there, they may have been working there for X amount of time, they have opinions about the place that they're working in, and they may communicate those opinions, and that's one of the first things that help trainees try and get an idea of what's possible in that place. So these relationships are crucial in forming the way the person thinks about the context. There's also the role of sociocultural tools, which I don't know if that's something that you've come across at all, but it's the stuff that we use, the stuff that we've made as human beings that help us understand, and the things that we work with that help us understand our environments and the things that we think are possible in those environments. And it can be something like a IT interactive whiteboard thing, or it could be the use of documents. Some schools, you'll go into a school and you'll see the staff timetable right in the middle of the staff room. You can see what everybody's doing everywhere all the time. And in other schools, each person will have a copy of their own timetable, and the main timetable will be in the head's office. So he'll know what everyone's doing, but not necessarily everybody else is. Now that's the use of the timetable as a sociocultural tool to gain and communicate understandings about how things work in the place. That's just one example. A place of social practice, schools I think fit that bill. Stuff goes on there, it's social and it's activity, and there's a wide range of it. And the trainees come in and have to bring their agenda that the university's given them, but the number of hours they have to teach, the types of teaching they have to do, and the sort of things they have to show they're able to do, into a place that might not share exactly the same agendas, and try and negotiate a way of being able to do the things that they need to do. And key to all of it is this idea that the person, the trainee, is uniquely experiencing the place. So even in peer placements, which is when two or more trainees from a department will go, from a university will go into the same department and be supports to each other, they'll still be having different classes, they'll be having different relationships with the teachers that work there, they'll be timetabled differently, different kids, okay, so they'll be having a different experience of it. So if we take agency and context together and have this idea of situated agency, my working definition of this is that situated agency is individuals' choices which are deemed apt by them for that place and that moment, and put together the way they work in the context and make those choices, that accumulates a series of experiences. Those experiences then form a trajectory. And if you look at the trainees' experience of teachers, what they're doing is they're building professional experience. This then creates a history of which they can draw on to project forward and anticipate things that will happen in the future. So they learn from them practice, and that helps them imagine their future practice. Okay. I'm going to ask you some questions, and you keep them in front of me. I'll come back to you after I've just said some stuff about the actual practicalities of data collection. My questions are three. The first is, are there any more definitions of agency that you know which attribute equal significance to context and person? The next one is, I hope to analyse some websites of the schools that the trainees are in, and I haven't come across any methodologies for website analysis, and I wondered if anybody knew any. And the third one is, are any of you aware of any similar research into person and context that I might be able to read about and draw on. So I'll give you some time to think about that and talk a little bit about the structure of the data collection. Those 3 interviews, sets of interviews, when I first went in and talked to the 150 trainees at Bath in November, I got over a fifth of them, over 20% of them saying, yeah, we'll do it, we'd love to do it. And then a few days later they went on their first block practice. And the numbers have dropped and dropped and dropped, but the people are actually able to give me the time for the 3 hours during the year. And it's a very demanding course, it's very, very time consuming. I was a teacher myself and I completely understand. I'm now left with, it was 7 when I made the poster, and now somebody's dropped out, actually left the course completely. So I'm left with 6 people, and I'm about to interview those 6 again for the last time. In addition to the transcripts of the interview, which I'll be coding, I have coded some of them and looked at the categories that are emerging about the 3 key concepts of situated agency, context, and becoming a teacher. I'm also asking them to complete something called a STEM sentence exercise. I don't know if you've come across them. You give them the start of a sentence and ask them to complete it in as much or little detail as they want. So you might say, I know learning is occurring in this school when, and they finish it. And it's a way of trying to get at values and beliefs that sort of they've picked up, that are less tacit perhaps in some of the understandings that they can articulate an interview. And that exercise is also given to their course tutors at university and their professional tutors in the schools. So there's a way of sort of comparing and seeing how sort of embedded they, or clued in, plugged in to the values of the school they seem to have been. And then there's the website analysis. At present, I'm analysing, just finishing analysing at a sort of preliminary level the second set of interviews, and something came out of the first one, which was I was supposed to be looking at person and context, and the questions that I'd asked about context weren't getting me sort of specific enough answers. It was all kind of vague, and they were concentrating on this kid in year 8 that had given them JIP for 6 weeks, and I know it wasn't as deep as I wanted to go. And before going into the second interview, I re-looked at the transcripts and said, well, what exactly are they talking about when they're talking about context? So I'd looked at beyond the questions that were about context to the whole transcript, and there were these 5 areas which I've called a model of context, which are not in any particular order, but include the trainees feeling that they were trying to fit in with the school, or that they were not succeeding, the messages they were getting, but not succeeding in fitting in. The freedom to experiment with different styles and ways of doing things, at the extent of that freedom. They picked up on inconsistencies quite quickly. So, you come from university and they say you've got to stand at the door and you've got to say hello to all the children. And you go in and you say to your mentor, is it all right if I do this? And they'll go, yeah, that's fine. And then you realise you're the only person in the department who's standing at the door, welcoming all their children, saying hello, and the rest of the teachers are all getting them in out of this crazy corridor where they're all barging each other around, and they're saying, no, what do I do when there's all these different messages? So that was something that really exercised them, and about the context and their way of negotiating it. And then there was 2 awarenesses of internal and external influences on the school. So the internal influences were things like the head suddenly said, everybody's got to have a uniform search, or this week in school we're going to be doing, an arts week, and there's no timetable, so the lessons that you'd planned you can't do. We've all got to be doing something different. So these are things that affect the internal culture of the school, but it can also be like tiny things, like saying, we have a briefing every morning. So your first lesson's here, but you've got to be there sort of half an hour earlier to go to the staff briefing. And this is sort of things that they picked up as internal influences on what they felt they were able to do. Then there were external influences, which you might imagine are things like Ofsted, assessments, visits by exam boards, things that the school didn't have control over to some extent. And they were also things that they felt affected how they could be. What I chose to talk about and put on the poster was this freedom to experiment, because this seems to be quite exciting to me as this. What they did talk about was, they chose to talk about was, all but one of them in the second interview talk about the importance of being able to make mistakes. And in some schools, it was absolutely fine. So I've got a couple of quotes from the first two. The first one, participant 5, she said it was a real culture of you're allowed to make mistakes. So she felt like, for her, she would go into a lesson not sure about it, but it was her time to experiment and try things out. And her trajectory when she drew it was an upward, 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 upward. She had that. Participant 1 had the same kind of thing, but twice in her first school and her second school, and she's got very little. This one, she's got like one tiny blip, and she said, I gave stuff a go, and she told about her mentor, was like, see what happens. But this participant had that at her first school, and her second school, she had this sort of, she described it as a bucket, this big dip. My complementary school mentor wasn't willing to let me make mistakes, and that's participant 2. She just said her mentor really wanted her to be a mini-me. So she had an idea about how things should be done, and that was a sort of a major influence on the progress that she felt that she was making in her trajectory towards becoming a teacher. So that's kind of, I'm going to be interviewing them for the last time in a couple of weeks. It's not the only findings that I've had at this stage, just to sort of that freedom of, the extent of freedom to experiment is the most important, nicest on a poster. But there's also this idea that trainees are susceptible to the culture in the school. They go in and they are immediately immersed in the way that school does things. In the second stage, this interview, they definitely had a growing responsiveness to the needs of students, which indicated to me a sort of a growing confidence from this accumulation of experiences. They were beginning to feel like they kind of had an idea of how things were going to pan out from the experiences that they'd accumulated in their first 2 practices, enough to stop thinking about worrying about what they were doing in the classroom and to start paying attention to what the students needed. Some of them had quite strong guides from their individual beliefs, and they took advice from people if they trusted them. And another finding was that what I was talking a little bit to Megan about was the idea of what Megan was talking about, is the moments of doubt. So all of them who've got to this stage of the study had moments of doubt, and I can't do it. I'm not going to be able to teach. I'm going to have to leave. And we're given some kind of, you'll be fine, just see how it goes, doesn't matter, and pushed through that, found they could do it, and that gave them this sort of, well, I don't know why I was worried about it moment that you guys had, which I think is also very important, as that sort of emotional aspect of giving somebody permission to try and push themselves beyond where they've got to. So the questions that I asked you, really, maybe you can talk to me about later or in this discussion part.